Harvard philosopher Hilary Putnam. In the mid-'70s, he wrote a paper called The Meaning of Meaning, which is very influential. And I guess the key slogan that came out of that is that meanings just ain't in the head. Agree, disagree, or just is that just incoherent?
It's incoherent without further explanation. First you have to tell us what meanings are. I mean, you can't decide whether they're in the head or not until we know what they are. If by meanings we have in mind what people have in mind when they're using the word in English, then sure, they're not in the head. They're all over the place. Talk about the meaning of life, it's not in the head. If you have some more technical notion in mind, you've got to explain what it is. If the technical, and there it's a matter of choice. You can define the technical notion so that it's in the head or so that it's not in the head. When you define technical notions, you have a choice. The way it's done in the sciences, and the way it ought to be done, is you define a technical notion in the context of an explanatory theory. You don't just define a technical notion out in space. So let's ask, what's the explanatory theory in which we're going to give a technical notion which will pronounce meaning, or pronounce it some other way, and then we'll ask whether that theory is a sensible theory, and does it place this technical concept in the head or not. But all that extra work hasn't been done.
Why can't we say there's just a pre-theoretical notion of meaning, and what we want to do is try and elucidate or precify it in some way or other?
Yeah, you could do that, but there's a million ways of doing it. So what about the meaning of life, for example? That's part of the pre-theoretical notion.
Is it?
Is it? Sure it is. I mean, people talk about the meaning of, what's the meaning of life all the time.
And you think that's the same notion of meaning as when you say, what's the meaning of the word?
No, there's thousands. You know, it's a huge range of things. What did he mean by saying so-and-so? Usually has to do with what was his intention, you know, or something like that.
Right.
So part of the pre-theoretical meaning has to do with people's intentions. In fact, when you talk about the meaning of a word, that's a rather English-specific locution. And we could focus on that if we like, but and if you want, you can try to clarify it. But again, to try to clarify a pre-theoretical notion makes sense within the framework of an effort to understand something, to an explanatory account.
Well, suppose we go with the following attempt to clarify, or at least introduction of a piece of technical terminology, which is philosophers will talk about the content of a mental state, or the content of some sort of expression. Is that helpful?
No, because content is a technical notion. It's not being used in the sense of the ordinary concept content.
Right.
And used by now, since Putnam, in fact, and Kripke and others, it's typically used to refer to something out there. So the content of an expression is not in the head by definition, because we've defined it to be not in the head.
Right.
All right, then the question is, well, does that have anything to do with our notions of, does that have anything to do with our understanding of the way language works and is used? Okay, that's the question. And you can certainly, I think it has very little to do with it.
Well, suppose we thought of it this way. Suppose we thought of the enterprise being sketched in the following way. There are two ways in which you might study primates, for example. You might study primate anatomy, in which case you're just concerned about, you know, bones and muscles and tendons and so forth. And then you might also study primate ecology, in which case you're studying the relation between the primate and its environment. And I take it that what these philosophers are talking about here, when they talk about external content, is that they're saying a part of talk about meaning has to be analyzed in terms of thinking about the organism, the human organism, in relation to its environment, right? So
it has to, if you want to study the relation between the human organism and its environment. And that's fine. There's nothing wrong with studying the human organism and its environment. That's what sociologists are doing all the time.
Right.
But you have to do it seriously. If you want to do it seriously, you ask, first of all, let's go back to primates. When you study primates in their ecology, you don't just look at the anatomy of primates. You look at the physiology of primates, what you might call mental processes of primates, I mean, the way they seem to be interpreting the world, the perceptual abilities of primates. In fact, what you try to do is exploit to the extent you can of what we know about an individual ape. You know, a chimpanzee, say, you want to know, what do we understand about that ape? And that information we will bring to bear in the study of how the ape interacts with other apes and with the rest of the environment and so on. That's the way it's done with primates or with ants or anyone else, and I think that's the way it ought to be done with humans. So we should ask, okay, well, what do we understand about the internal nature of the creature that's doing all these things? And to the extent that we understand something about that, we can ask sensible questions about how it interacts with the external world, with other people, and so on and so forth.
Do you think that could potentially inform the sort of internalist investigation as well?
Sure, it goes the other way. I mean, there's no order. You can study the sociology of ape communities, and that'll tell you something, could tell you something important about the internal thinking processes of apes, or even their internal anatomy.
And vice versa, presumably.
Yeah, sure. Science goes all ways.
Here's another technical term that's been used, reference. You consider that to be incoherent as well? Or?
Well, until it's explained, it's incoherent. Once it's explained, then it becomes non-incoherent.
Well, you see, one thing I've never quite understood is exactly what the problem is with reference, because, I mean, I can say, well, okay, now I'm referring to this coffee cup.
That's different.
That's
quite different.
Okay.
You're talking about an action of referring.
Right.
That's a common sense notion. It's part of English and every language I know of. There's some way to talk about such actions. But what philosophers have introduced is a different notion, a notion that's supposed to hold between a linguistic entity and something in the world. Now, that's not referring. Referring is an act that people do.
Well, yeah, this is the point that goes back to Strawson,
50 years ago, but I mean, it goes way back. But,
well,
and it's just a fact.
Okay, so let's take
this. If you want to make up a technical term which you pronounce the same way, first of all, it's questionable whether you should pronounce it the same way because it's misleading. But if you do, let's at least keep clear that it's a technical term, kind of like physicists use energy. You know, they don't mean it the way we do in ordinary language. They mean it the way they say they mean it. So let's take the technical term refer or denote or whatever you want to call it, and tell us what it's supposed to, tell us what you mean by it, and tell us what explanatory theory it enters into. So when a physicist defines energy, you're not interested in the definition. You're interested in the set of principles and assumptions and so on, problems and so on, within which that technical concept is introduced, and then you look and see how good the theory is. Well, here we don't have any theory. And we don't even have an explanation of what the technical notion is, so it's impossible to talk about it.
Yeah, I think it might be a mistake to think of it as a technical notion. I mean, I think it's just a sort of precisified way of describing certain basic core-level facts, right?
Right.
So, for example, I might say, well, once you understand that people refer to things and so forth, it's not a hard step to say, well, okay, certain names are canonically used to refer to certain things and certain individuals. So the name Noam Chomsky, I mean, I can ask the audience here, what person in this room does that term refer to?
Well, you could ask, what do you use that term when you refer to something in the world? That you can ask. Right. But when you ask what the term refers to, you're assuming that there is a relation between terms and things. And then you have to explain what that relation is, because that's a new one. We don't have that in ordinary language. And in fact, I think it's leading us off into a wrong picture, as Wittgenstein would have called it. And it's leading us to a picture of language, which is, we know what it's based on. I mean, it's based on things like Frege's, the theory of arithmetic, and it's just the wrong picture for language, I think.